It's the Kick and Snare Podcast. Let's count it off. Welcome to Kick and Snare. My guest today is Hazel Savage, CEO of Syntho. Did I say that properly, first of all?
You did. You said it 100% correctly, Michael.
Okay, good.
And,
So
thank you so much. It's lovely to meet you, and thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So welcome to the Kick and Snare Podcast. I was pleased to speak with you after a meeting recently and a podcast interview with Matt Cartmel. I asked about members of Music Tech UK, and he suggested we speak, and that's what led us to be here today. So thank you again for joining. But first, before we get into Music Tech UK, which is definitely part of the conversation, I hope, today, tell me more about yourself, and I guess we should start with Syntho, and then we can go backwards from there, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, although I've been the CEO at Syntho now for 2 months, so that's quite a short story. But I think probably what I'm best known for is starting a music AI company in 2018 called Musio, and raised a $2 million seed round in 2019. Got to profitability by year 3. Sold that company to SoundCloud in 2022. So up until December 24, I was still working at SoundCloud. I was still part of that team. And then my whole plan was to retire. And so I was telling everyone I was retired and I was not doing anything. And I had the whole of January 25 off. And a very sort of tenacious young founder called Josh Baker persuaded me that I should come and be the CEO of his new startup, which is called Syntho. So I did retire for like 1 month. But as a natural workaholic, I am now straight back in.
Understood. Yeah, I like the idea of retiring, but A, I'm not sure I can afford to, and B, I don't know what I would do with my time otherwise, so I'll try to figure that out at some point. So it must have been a pretty compelling mission at Syntho to pull you out of your short retirement and get you moving again. Tell me more about that.
Definitely. And I think, as I say, when I call Josh like tenacious, that's no exaggeration. I think it was originally probably about a year ago, he showed up at an event I was speaking at in Leeds, and he kind of approached me then with some questions. And I was just like, who is this confident young individual? And so there was that initial conversation. And then he approached me a couple of more times, like, would I be interested in joining? What would that look like? And I was always, oh, that's really nice of you to offer. That's really kind. But, I'm still at SoundCloud, or I'm not looking. And then when I exited SoundCloud, I started to, I had several approaches. But I think what impressed me the most about Syntho was, you've got the founder, Josh, who's on this kind of like rocket ship career path. He's just hit 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify. He's like, right now, today, he's in Ibiza. He's playing Glastonbury this year. He's just really, really sort of hit the big time as a producer and a DJ, and I'm so pleased for him. And so what a great reason to want to hand over the reins of the CEO role to somebody else, right? Because it's a rocket ship rather than, a lot of the other offers I had that came around earlier this year were like companies in slight distress who needed a lot of help. And I just thought, if I'm going to work that hard, if I'm going to jump on in, I'd like it to look like a rocket ship, from the outside and the inside, luckily. And also the revenue, it's, this company did $700,000 revenue last year, which for a completely bootstrapped music UK tech startup is almost unheard of. And I say that because as an investor, I see about 20 decks a week. And, I spend a lot of time reviewing and looking at other businesses. And sometimes I invest, like I've got 9 angel investments to date that I've done. So I also feel like I know what I'm looking for when it comes to success. And I was like, holy shit, how did this get to that amount of revenue? And like, I've never heard of it and no one's heard of it. So that to me was like, something's happening here. I'm excited about that.
Got it. That's a cool story. And it makes sense the way you tell it. I can understand why you felt compelled.
I've been working on it. I've been working on the story. I was like, how can I best get across this message?
Well, you're effective. So well done. Mission accomplished. I guess it's I can understand why it would be so compelling. And when you have your choice of things to do, having something that feels like a rocket ship and it's fun. It's, it can be fun to work on something that's early stage and struggling too, but it's a different kind of fun. There you're celebrating the tiny wins, and here you're celebrating momentum and involved in something pretty exciting. So
right.
That's
and
cool.
there was a really exciting call we did with a big company, a big music company yesterday. And, they're at the stage where they want to work with people like us because our scope for innovation is just huge, and we have a new product release coming this week that we're all really excited about. And, we asked our Instagram followers to guess what that product release would be. And I went and wrote down every single comment because they were incredible. I was like, wow, this is like the top 50 things that our customers would want to see on our platform. Like this is gold dust. And, I was just like the fact that we have so much like headroom and so much space in front of us that like we could do almost any one of these things or all of them. I feel like we're probably only like 1% into the growth journey of this company versus like I spoke with a massive music company yesterday who they've already innovated in nearly all the ways it's possible to innovate. So now they want to partner with people like us to kind of keep building that innovation. But that to me was hugely exciting as well, because it just feels like there's like 100 unopened doors in front of you and you can open any of them.
Right. One of the questions I intended to ask, and I will still get into it, was about the emphasis on community at Syntho. And candidly, my thinking at first was that this community was largely beneficial for the sake of the members and subscribers. But you have already pointed out that there's great benefit in cultivating the community, not just from a subscriber growth perspective, but from a product and insights perspective. What things were most interesting, or well, I don't want you to give away secrets. But I imagine some of the feedback you get may seem intuitive, but yet still surprising in a way.
And you know what? I could probably like rank the list from like, that's an incredible idea and realistic, right the way to that's an insane idea and no one would ever do that. And I still documented all of it because I think it's interesting. And like on the more insane end of the spectrum, one was they thought we were going to announce a hologram of our founder, which is just very not what we're doing, and kind of crazy and wouldn't really drive the business forward, but kind of insane. So I like the idea. Right. And then the other one, which I think was probably a joke, was somebody was going to ask if our founder was going to drop a tutorial on how he does his hair. So that's kind of a little bit of a jokey one right there. So that was like the extreme ridiculous end of the spectrum.
Right.
And then right the way, and then kind of in the middle ground was somebody else had commented, it'd be great if we could get track feedback. And that was actually, we do that already. So that was a great opportunity to go, someone's either missed that we do this, or this is a great chance for us to reiterate that this is a huge part of our offering. So then there was that kind of stuff in the middle. And then like right at the other end of the spectrum, it was like, you should do a label, you should do events, you should do webinars, you should offer one-on-one tutoring, and like you should offer offline watching, for our videos. So it was like, and so as I say, the whole spectrum from like, you should do like an online webinar, which is like, oh yeah, that's kind of a cool idea, right the way to Josh should do a video about his hair. So like, it was like, sublime to the ridiculous. Yeah,
that's cool though. I think that ethic of listening to your users and being open about it and creating that forum is really valuable as you develop products and services. And also, as a communications guy and a marketer, I'm always interested in interface, especially when interface is the product in a way. And, when you discover, wow, somebody doesn't know we have this feature that we've already developed, we need to be thinking about how we're talking about it.
And I think one of my most crystal clear examples of something like that came from my time at Musio. And I always think this is one of a really crucial day in my head that really set us apart as a successful music AI company versus our competitors, which was, I always thought that the key to music AI success in terms of enterprise sales would be people need to see it working. Like, it's not enough for me to go, yeah, we have an AI that can tag 83 genres. If the client can't try it, I could be saying any old nonsense, right? Yeah. So we had this web demo, and the way the web demo still exists at musio.com is you can go to the website and you can upload an MP3 or drop a link, and we will just give you the data on that one track. So you can see the genres that we think. And, so people can go and try and trick it. They can go and try and upload anything, see what happens. There are some limitations, like it can't be under 15 seconds. It can't be over 15 minutes, standard limitations. But actually, before we launched that demo, which was instrumental to the success of Musio, we were just about to update the website because we all agreed that the client has to be able to test this. And we originally thought what we should do is have a test API key that people could use. And we were like, yeah, that's it. We've solved it. Okay, update the website. Let's put the API key up there. And then literally as we were about to hit publish, we were all crowded around our front end developer's desk. I just said, sorry, can we just take a breath? I'm just thinking that the crossover, the Venn diagram of people who can use an API key and people who work in the music industry, there isn't really an overlap on those circles.
Yeah. We need an interface. Yeah.
I think we're about to launch something that no one's going to be able to use. And so we literally stopped right there, redesigned it into this demo where you could drop a link in. And it was the ability to, it would have just been so easy to just go live, right? It would have just been so easy to go, do you know what? We already built it. Or to be able to say, do you know what? It's ready to go. Let's just do it. And to change tack, to pivot right at the last minute, that's a tough thing to do as a founder because, that was probably not a popular decision that I made in that moment. But I think it's, as I say, I credit a large part of our success to the fact that, without logging in, without doing much else, all of our clients could come and drop in tracks. And, we asked for it. All we'd ask for is once the track was uploaded, we'd display some of the information. And then to unveil all of the tags, you had to drop in an email, right? And so we had, within the first week, Spotify, Apple, Sony, all the majors, everyone was trying this demo. And so that level of insight, but these aren't people who could have used an API key. So yeah, just that, I think that's a great example of making a really last minute switch that was not popular.
Right. But still the right move.
Right.
That makes sense. Yeah. I've been interested in this concept of, the top down sale and the bottom up sale when it comes to tech. I'll illustrate this a little bit further. And I think you did exactly what I'm getting at, in that business people, not technical, lay people, whatever you want to call them, have ears, and they're often the decision makers. Others involved in the decision making, depending on where you are in the sales process or the evaluation process from the customer side, sometimes are technical people who may not understand the business as well as the business person, may not be able to make that judgment, but you also want them on board when it comes time to do business. So having a well-formed API available for the technical audience, which maybe you're posting in a forum or on I don't know, GitHub or whatever, those types of places where developers would be working, helps build your credibility, where then you're talking to the business people and they ask the technical person, hey, what do you think of this? Here's the documentation. Yeah. We tried it. We think it's cool. Here's the interface. Here's the API. Then you have hopefully advocates working on both sides or top and bottom. I don't mean to put developers on the bottom, but I let's say grassroots support. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting thing to keep in mind for tech marketers. You have to make it tangible and accessible, but at the same time, you need to show that you have the technical underpinnings to be credible to engineers and people who are going to have to actually work with the product every day.
100%. And I think, another little interesting insight from Musio, from our data analytics, was obviously our number one viewed page is obviously the homepage. So the majority of people landing on musio.com, 80% of people, the first page they click on after that is team. So people land and they go, okay, Music AI, who's doing it? And I think that feeds into that credibility as well, because I still do the same. If I get pitched a really great Music AI company and I click to the team page and I'd see there isn't a CTO or there isn't a team of developers or the founder does not have the right expertise to do it, it instantly loses credibility for me.
Agreed.
And I mean,
also sensitivity to IP, right? These days, that's another big factor, particularly if you're looking, for me at least, if looking at an AI company,
right.
There are so many people operating on one side of the, how do I put it? One side of the law, and others operating on other sides of the law, or should I say laws, depending on the country.
Right.
It's important to know if people are sensitive to IP issues or not.
And that line has been drawn,
training and otherwise.
That line feels like it's been drawn directly down. Like it was always a problem trying to get music and tech people to work together. And now it feels like, unfortunately, that gap has widened, because I haven't met a single music person who doesn't agree that, IP needs to be respected and you shouldn't use audio for training. But I also have yet to meet a kind of a young, early 20s technical background developer who thinks the exact opposite, who thinks if it's on the internet, you can use it. And I feel like that gap is, there's very few of us like myself who are a little foot in both camps. But that gap to me feels like since 2018, it's widened rather than closed.
Right. That makes sense. And it's an interesting insight. I remember once having a conversation about people who were essentially using Napster or other peer-to-peer programs to trade music.
Right. And
I was working at a software company, and at that time somebody said, it's fine. Well, we're not stealing. We're, who are we hurting? And I said, would you feel the same way if somebody took our software, cracked a CD or whatever, and started to share it with others in the community without paying us for it? Good point. So there is an interesting divide there. And I think developers often are, because there's sort of this scrappy sort of ethic, they're used to finding shareware or things that are, freely available without necessarily knowing the origins of the IP, the underlying IP.
Well, think about like the whole open source community, right? There's a whole ethos behind the ability to create something and share it with the rest of the world for out monetary gain, right? So I think culturally it's a different space. Agreed.
Yeah, but if you want to be successful in the music industry, you must be respectful of rights. And
100%.
They learned that soon enough.
100%.
They figured it out. So Syntho seems like on its way, a rocket ship, as you put it, to a great trajectory and well along its way. But there, at the same time, there's an abundance of resources these days out there, from YouTube on back, and many of paid services, of course. What ultimately is setting Syntho apart? What's making them successful in the context of all this available content and information on the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, I had like the exact same question when I first met with Josh, is like, and this perhaps slightly ignorantly on my part, I was like, isn't there just a load of free videos on YouTube? Like that, I think that's like my default answer for most things these days. But what was really interesting was Josh decided to start the company because, 10 years ago when he was trying to learn Ableton and he was first starting out as a producer, he felt A, those resources weren't there. And then B, when they were there, whether he signed up for a course in person or whether it was online, he didn't really feel like he was being taught by experts. And so he thought that there was a real gap in the market for people who want to learn this from the people who are successful at this.
I see.
And, and he also was just creating something which is, and this is fascinating for me to learn about the producer community, which is they already work with each other a lot and interact with each other a lot. So he said a lot of like known producers or, people who are sort of on his peer group would be approaching him regardless to say, how did you do this? How do you do that? Can you help me with this? Like, how does this thing work? And so I think he basically thought, what if I'm just going to productize all these requests that I'm already getting, which is often where the best ideas for companies come from, right? It's like he already had the requests coming in. He already had the demand side, and he already thought, it wasn't great when I was learning. So how can I improve that? So the idea, and I think what's really resonated with the communities and the customers online, is that if you come to our platform, you can learn how to make a track like Josh Baker. You can learn production tips from Marcelo. And, you can learn from ADR. Like, these are fantastic gigging, known sort of names in the UK house music scene. And that seems to be the thing that's resonating with people. It's got a premium quality to it. Like maybe there's some stuff you could cobble together on YouTube, but you're either going to hit a wall pretty early, or you're not going to be able to discern the good from the bad, right? So this is kind of a premium education service that we're offering, and that seems to be really resonating with people. And of course, we've put a lot of time and effort and care into making sure the videos look premium. I'm not going to name them, but I track a lot of the competitors, and I saw one of their videos the other day, and it was shot in someone's bedroom. Fair enough, you can't do that, but they just kind of thrown a rug over some stuff, and I was just like, is that like the guy's laundry or something? Like, and I just didn't scream premium to me, you know what I mean? So
I get that.
So I was just like, absolutely no piles of laundry in the back of Syntho videos,
right?
Guaranteed.
Makes sense. Yeah, people pick up on things. They'll look and see, is that guitar a Gibson or an Epiphone? Right. Is it, is that is that interface United Audio, or is it Focusrite, or whatever?
Yeah,
they're sensitive to those things.
Speaking of which, because we got three Gibson SGs right here.
I see.
And they are all legit Gibsons, but the one in the middle is the Gibson Goddess, which is the limited edition from 2006, made especially for women. Because it's slightly smaller, slightly lighter. I actually own 3 Gibson Goddesses because they're really hard to get hold of. You can only get them on the secondhand market.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, so that's, as much as I'm going to nerd out about the guitar stuff, I feel like there's the same exists in all genres, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think those things become important clues in terms of quality or perception of suitability in a product or the credibility of the people who are speaking. So it's interesting stuff.
I don't think you can see it from here because I'm there's another 6 guitars on this wall, but also I love that if you're clocking Gibsons, there's actually an Orville by Gibson here as well, but it looks exactly just like a standard Les Paul. So yeah, there's nerdery, and then there's like the next level.
Right. If I had more wall space, I'd hang a couple. I'm not really a guitarist, but I own a couple of nice guitars. So I have a Fender. I have a Strat that stays out here because for me, it's a little more comfortable to play.
Nice.
So that sits out when the inspiration strikes. And then I also have a Les Paul Standard, which is beautiful and in the case, and it makes me feel guilty that it doesn't come out. But I can't bring myself to give it away or sell it. Somebody's gonna play this guitar someday and give it what it deserves because it's a gorgeous object, unto itself. Yeah. I buy too many drums, particularly snare drums. You can't see them here, but as primarily a drummer, I have way too many.
That's what you need mounted on the wall behind you. Like, I don't know if there's a good system for that, but that would look really cool.
I have rigged one. My son, who's now 21, is also a drummer, and in his bedroom, we redid his bedroom at one point, when he went from child to teenager, I guess. And I took a chrome piccolo snare drum, had a piece of mirror cut out for to fit essentially inside the head, mounted that on top of the head, and rigged a way to hang it on the wall. So he's got this little piccolo snare drum mirror in his room, which is kind of cool.
I like that.
When he moves out permanently, I'm going to steal it back.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
That stays with the house.
Yeah, that's ours. Yeah. You could take the rest of the stuff. We've gotten into this a little bit already, but I'd love to shift gears and talk about your background. We touched on this idea of squiggly careers earlier in our conversation.
Right.
And you've had a very interesting career. It seems like there's some logical thread to it for sure, but also I imagine some opportunities that came your way. And the first thing I was going to ask was about your background in music, and you've talked enough about guitars for me to be clear that you're a musician. So tell us about that first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I love the term squiggly career because I think that's like a polite way of trying to like encapture what was at the time obviously like quite chaotic, like you say, lots of opportunities, but sometimes just pure chaos. Sure. And holy, I've got to get a job kind of attitude. But yeah, I got my first guitar for my 13th birthday. I still have that. It's Fender Telecaster. It is not one of the guitars hung up in this room right now. But that's the pride and joy. So yeah, I was a guitarist from the age of 13. I wanted to be a famous rock star. That was my career goal. I'm genuinely really pleased that I am not a famous rock star.
Yeah.
Like, it looks like fame itself. I've pivoted. I think fame at 20 sounds amazing. Fame at 40 sounds like hassle. So I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm really glad that I'm a failed rock star, which is how I like to introduce myself. Either retired or failed rock star, whichever gets me the best response at the time. And if I'm out in a club, I just tell people I'm an accountant, because I also really don't want to have to explain what I actually do. Right. So to people who genuinely won't know. So it depends on the scenario. But I used to work at HMV. So I used to work at a record store whilst I was at uni. That was evenings and weekends. And then I went full time in the record store after uni. And then the whole time I was like applying for other jobs. Like, what is a full-time job? I mean, I had a full-time job, but it was in retail. And I was like, it'd be great to like not have to deal with the general public on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
And I got an interview and ultimately was hired by what was at the time a very, very small music tech startup called Shazam. This was pre-iPhone. So we were like a super, super small UK startup, which at the time, like now it's like the golden era of startups. But at the time I was just like, it's just a job, got a job, love it. Right. They give you loads of free booze. It's awesome. Sure. Loads of music. It's cool. Because I was like
pre-iPhone, there was a lot happening with music and mobile, but it hadn't exploded yet. It really
exactly
hadn't.
Old school mobiles. Like I think I had like a Sony Ericsson at the time, buttons and everything.
Oh yeah.
And it was, it was great because it was, I was about 22 when I joined that company, and I was there for over 4 years, and I absolutely loved it. The iPhone launched whilst I worked there, the very first iPhone. So it went from like being a very small company that no one had heard of to probably the job that I'm asked about the most, and or like one of the biggest names that I've worked for. So it was really exciting and it was really fun. And, there are still, post the acquisition by Apple, there are still some of the team that I worked with who still work there, who now work at Apple. I think one of the devs is coming up on his like 17th year anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Because we just did a reunion drinks in London a couple of months ago. And it was great. It was honestly, love seeing those people. And I think that was probably the first job as well that gave me a real love for working with tech people. The environment in tech is so respectful and everyone works so quickly. And so there's a lot less ego, I think, or there used to be in tech than there was in music. So I just thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely loved it. And I was actually headhunted out of Shazam by Universal Music Australia. Because they essentially wanted me to do what I did at Shazam, which was really focused on content, videography, social media. They wanted me to come over to Australia and do something similar. So I did that, and I flew to Australia and I moved there. And the slight downside was I got there and I realized that almost nobody in the company was on board with this idea. There was a lot of, we are talking way, way before music streaming. There was a lot of people there that were just not on board with the idea of digital / online, and I was like, wow, what an uphill struggle. And it really felt then that Australia was a good 10 years behind the UK in terms of, well, basically the reason I got hired is because there had never been a successful app out of Australia at that time in the music space. So I was like, okay, well, this is wild. But it was just too early, way too early.
Did you have the executive sponsorship that you needed to be successful? Because I've been that sort of change agent innovator within larger organizations. And actually, I'm thinking back to one of the recent episodes that I published with Alana Sofko, who also was a mobile pioneer and working to innovate at larger media companies. And that topic of executive sponsorship versus, we have to do this to check a box versus we're really committed to it came up a lot. So I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think, and that's a great way to summarize it as well, because I felt like at the time, Universal Music Australia had a staff of about 150 people. And I always say there was about 2 people on board with the idea of going digital and moving forward. One of those people was my boss, Mia McLeod, who I'm a huge fan of. And she was my boss when I moved over there. She was really on board with it. But given the size of the company at the time, 1 or 2 people on board is not enough. And I was not brought in at a senior enough level because I was 26. I was not brought in at a senior enough level to actually make the changes. I was brought in thinking, you just need me to do the work that I can do. But I wasn't brought in at a director or a senior level where I could go, we are doing this, you know. So I was brought into a role as as a hands-on person, and nobody was on board. And then, unfortunately, my boss, Mia, she had a 3-month sabbatical, sort of long leave service, and she took that. And then while she was out, I was gone, got rid of me.
That's painful. It's interesting being that innovator in otherwise, I hesitate to call a record label stodgy, but I guess in functionally in this case, they were and often are still rooted in the old world.
And I think it's a sign of the times as well, because that whole team is now mostly no longer there, and it's a whole new team. And even as recently as the last 5 years, you know, I heard about UMG Australia launching essentially a digital agency internally. And I read that in the news and I was like, oh, I love that. I was like, that's kind of what we were trying to do. Right. But it had taken another 10 years for the whole company to get behind it and a whole new leadership team. So in a way, stodgy is the right word, because there were just people working there, and, you know, people who were, when I joined, there were people who they'd let you know, I've been here 20 years, I've been here 25 years, this isn't how we do things. Literally those words. And, you know, so that made me realize as well, there's very little point taking a job if no one wants you to do that job, you know? Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, sometimes, always timing matters, right?
Right.
And sometimes you're too early because of the market. Sometimes you're too early because the organization isn't ready. Mm-hmm. A very successful, brilliant investor I know once said to me, I don't know why I'm getting alerts. I shouldn't be. A brilliant investor once said to me that being too early is the same as being wrong. And that stung when I heard it, but I think it was on target. So I want to be respectful of the fact that we're going to have a hard stop soon. I have to imagine, because you've been successful in what are typically male-dominated spaces for a long time. Mm-hmm. I used this phrase also with Alana Sofko recently. I imagine that you were the only woman in the room in certain circumstances. What was that like? What is that like?
Yeah, a lot of the times, yeah. And I always say to people, it's like, it's, you know, music can be quite male dominated, not in terms of the artist, but in terms of who you see in the, you know, in the companies that are in the sort of B2B music space. They can tend to be very male dominated. And then tech is also very male dominated. And then if you find the intersection of those two things, it's even more male dominated, you know? So it's like you're doubling down on that. And part of me is totally fine with it, because I often just generally, maybe it's because I don't know if it's just I'm bulldozering over people, or I just genuinely do not give AF, but it doesn't bother me. And comments that I get, and if I do get them, man, I really don't care about those people, you know, and they just, you know, and I think I've just got to that point. I remember when I was building Musio, and I was I'd walked back into my old incubator, where they, you know, I mean, look, when I did the incubator in Singapore, there was 100 people in my cohort, 6 women out of 100.
Right.
So statistically not great. And I remember I walked in 6 months later, and it was the next group, the next cohort building. And I was just chatting away with somebody I knew, and this really arrogant man walked up, and he was just like, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm with my co-founder, we're building a company. It's an AI that can listen to music. And he just went, well, that won't work. And I just went, bye. And I just literally walked off, because I was like, I do not give a fuck what this guy thinks. Who is this guy? I could not care less. So I really spend a lot of time not really caring what people think, which is super empowering and just the best way to be. And, you know, I've had little comments as well, and maybe it's just being a little bit robust towards them. You know, I think I've told the story before, but when myself and my co-founder, so my co-founder Aaron is a Swedish guy, we're the same age. And, you know, we walked into an investor meeting once, and the investor just stared at us and pointed at us both and went, are you married? And, you know, this is in Singapore, where that's not an illegal question. So they were just, are you married? And I just went, yeah, but not to each other. you know, and then moving on, you know, so it's just like, I kind of don't really care. Like someone's got to be like pretty offensive to annoy me these days, because you just got to roll with it.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that. Often I'm curious about what that feels like. I mean, I've been in business for a long time, and I'm sure I've made horrible mistakes and, you know, been biased when I shouldn't have been. And, you know, please, everybody forgive me. I'm trying to get better. But I'm always curious to hear about it from the perspective of others. And thank you for sharing that. So
welcome.
Let's talk about Music Tech UK.
Yes.
I'd like to learn more about your involvement. Tell me about the membership. I know you've only been at Syntho for a while, and the organization itself is young. Tell me about how you've been involved, benefits you see, that type of thing.
So I think I originally met like Matt Cartmel, the founder. I think I met him about 2 years ago at a conference called California. And that is a super amazing conference because it's very small, it's very exclusive, but it feels like every single person you meet there is like, oh, wow, this is a great contact. So I think he and I just grabbed a coffee and he told me what he was going to do, like with this Music MT UK setup. And I was like, sounds great. Like keep, you know, and at the time I might have even still been living in Singapore, or I might have just moved back. But I was like, you know, I definitely wouldn't have known the UK scene that well at the time. So because I was so new back to it. So I was just like, sounds great. Yeah. Why wouldn't you do this? You know, there are other great sort of music tech setups in the US and in mainland Europe. So I just kind of gave him my verbal support, and I was like, think it sounds cool. And obviously he's been beavering away in the background, like building great things. And then our first interface was obviously once I was working at SoundCloud and I became a part of SoundCloud, I think I brought SoundCloud in as a member. I see. So obviously I worked out of the SoundCloud London office, and we were like the smallest office when I joined, about 20 people. It's up to about 40 now. But like we were like small but mighty. And I was like, I must admit, before I joined SoundCloud in 2022, I didn't even know they had a UK office. So I was like, we got to be part of the scene way more. We got to let people know we're here. We got, there's so many amazing artists in the UK and so many other cool companies we could partner with. So that was really important to me. And Matt sort of did the partnership for SoundCloud, and I was really, really happy with that. Obviously, I exited SoundCloud at the end of last year. So Matt was just kind of like, he kind of hit me up and he was like, hey, you should join as an individual. And I was like open to it, but also knew what was coming with Syntho. So I kind of like, I was like, just give it a minute. And then obviously once I joined Syntho, I was like, it's a no-brainer because this thing is perfectly set up for companies of our size at Syntho and perfectly set up for people like us to get the most out of it. And by that, I mean, as I say, for good or for better or for worse, my first month at Syntho, I could tell like 100 people that I worked at Syntho and 99 would not know what that was.
Right.
And so I was like, we got to be part of the community again for very different reasons to why SoundCloud should. But sure. Like, how do we, Josh has built a really incredible business and got it to this stage without anybody knowing who they are, which, I feel like is doing things on hard mode. So I was like, yeah, we absolutely want to be part of this community and meet with other startups of a similar size to us, network, find partnerships with other companies. And that's kind of part of my role coming in, like, because I'm the one with the kind of B2B industry background. So that's kind of what MT means to us.
Got it. That's helpful. What do you think the key challenges are that are facing music and tech startups right now? particularly in the UK, or I guess we could broaden it to Europe in general. What are the big challenges that exist? And
I would say one of the main ones, and I really sympathize with this, and I can understand, is usually capital. So it's usually finance. And I would say that from the perspective of, obviously, I see about 20 decks a week. Probably half of them are music tech companies. The UK is just, the UK tends not to do a lot of pre-revenue investment. So, I don't know if you know anything about investing in the US, but US investors are a lot more open to, oh, you have a crazy idea and you've built nothing. I'll give you £1 million. Because that's kind of a little bit like the Silicon Valley way, right? Sure. High risk, high reward. UK investment doesn't really work like that. Like, all the things that, I remember even going to a talk because Asia and Singapore is more like the UK. Mm-hmm. I remember somebody saying, at seed stage, all you need is the team and the idea. And I was like, That's not true. And in fact, all the things they say you need at a Series A, which is product market fit, traction, revenue, team, idea, MVP, those are the things that in both the UK and Singapore, you actually need to raise money. And I get that makes it more difficult for people building companies, but the UK is just not the place that someone's going to give you like $1 million just to try an idea you've had, you know? And so if I get hit up, which is not uncommon, if I get hit up with like 6 decks that are all like, this is the new app for artist community creation. And I'm like, okay, but the 6 of you, and none of you have built anything, and none of you have got any traction. There's absolutely no way for me to differentiate which of these 6 will be successful. Therefore, I'm going to pass on all of them. You know, whereas if one of them had built it and gone, we've got 10,000 users, I'd be like, now we're talking.
Okay,
so I think that's hard for a lot of startups to hear, but I also think it's one of the biggest challenges because, you know, it really sort of does affect who can actually start a company. Like how can somebody start if they need to get to a certain point before people will invest? It's definitely a challenge. And I guess that's what you have stuff like, you know, UK Innovate and grants and grant funding and incubator programs. That's what that's there for. But the jump between that and actually getting funding, I think is probably what UK startups would say is one of the biggest challenges.
Understood. Well, I hate to cut this short, but we're at the end of our time. And I know we both have meetings following this, so we'll be respectful to those who will be waiting for us otherwise. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you. And it's a very interesting conversation for me, and I hope for our listeners, and hopefully fun for you.
Yeah, and, really fun.
Thank you very much for being with me today, with us on the Kick Snare Podcast. It was a pleasure talking to you, and hope we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much, Michael. Pleasure to be here.